Okay, we're starting. Okay, wait a minute. Okay,
Also serious here this morning.
all right, we're ready.
All right. So good morning. I'm Joe Iamartino from the Thompson Historical Society, and most of you, I think, I know. For the few that I don't, I've been doing this for 20-something years. There was a time called the Great Awakening. Now, the Great Awakening happened numerous times. There's Great Awakening 1, the Great Awakening 2. But the one that most people say when they say the Great Awakening, it's this one that we're going to be talking about today. It actually is technically Great Awakening 2, if you like the research. But this is, I just call it the Great Awakening. It had a huge impact on the Congregational, the Baptist and Methodist church. So we're just going to talk about a little bit of that story now.
Wait a minute, Joe, hold on.
Yep, go back up.
Hold on.
Let's start again if you want. Give me the shorter version. There will be a test on.
I'm not getting this. I'm only getting, can you come look at this just for a second? Peek over here. I'm only getting that. I'm not getting it here. I just did share.
Sharing.
Just shot that, but that's all I'm getting.
And I can't explain it.
Okay. How about okay, that's okay. I'll get a little bit closer to that then. Okay, all right.
Sorry about that.
All right, sorry. Okay, we're good.
Okay, so here we go. There's a chair right behind you. So we're in terms of the history, this church goes back to 1730. The church itself was structured when it became Thompson Parish.
I have a question.
Yes,
I'm sorry, is it questions anytime, or do you want us to go to the end?
if they're quick, if I can't make it quick, then we'll say we'll hold that to the end in terms of an answer. But go ahead.
There are two dates that the church started, 1728 and 1740. You quoted 1730. Do you know anything about the 1728 date?
Well, there is the foundation of a church versus when the actual structure was ready to use.
Oh, okay.
Okay, which is actually what I'm going to show you the next slide. Okay.
It's a setup.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll give you a nickel later. So in the period where I'm talking about, when the Congregational Church, one of the reasons why the Congregational Church was established is it didn't want to have any bishops and it wanted to be independent. So each one was independent of themselves. Compare that to the Catholics. The Catholics, central Pope, everybody's reporting to the Pope. Congregationalists wanted to be very unique, very independent. At that time, now I'm talking at the decade before the Great Awakening, so I'm starting the story at 1799. This facility, the first church had already been operating for nearly 60 years at this point. And it was very much a Federalist agenda. So supporting George Washington, supporting John Adams, wearing homespun, we're going to make our own textiles, that type of thing. It was a very big period of time then. They didn't want to have anything to do with the Church of England, Catholic churches. Those were centrally commanded churches, and they were considered the enemy, really. The Catholic Church was the enemy. And there was a Puritan belief that the Congregationalists were Calvinists. Calvin was the original thought, and that they had a belief that management abused their positions, that they wore fancy clothes, they had high expenses, the churches were very, very ornate, and they just really didn't want to be Romanish. That's right, didn't want to be popish. By 1799, right here on Thompson Hill, the Congregationalists were wary of the sects that were coming in from Rhode Island especially. Doesn't mean they weren't coming in from other places, but we're talking about the Quakers and the Baptists, Jews, some Catholics. And there's a reason. I want you to just kind of hold that thought for a minute. I'll explain a little bit more. But this was a very much, we want our own religion, we want our own culture built around it. The ministers were paid by charges, but all Thompson residents had to pay. Everybody was required to pay. Now, there's a reason for that. Church, until that year prior, was responsible for controlling the education. It was handed charity. If somebody needed some help, the church was typically, the ministry would be the one to step in, get involved. The town hall was called a meeting house because that's where they did town business as well as church business. So now I'm going to show you another image here, an image. And so this is the second time this has been shown to anybody. It's a reconstruction of the very first church on Thompson Hill. So it looks very unfamiliar to us, but the house in the bottom left still exists. And way up in the top, the Samuel Watson house still exists. So they exist. And in the middle of the little common, the reason why there is the little common is because that church used to sit there. And this is 1799-ish. The year before, they added a steeple and a clock to it. So it's kind of an interesting little structure. So that's the first Congregational church. Right next to it on the right-hand side where the current Thompson Museum is, that was the second tavern on Thompson Hill. You'll notice the Vernon Styles isn't there. Just past where that, past it, you can see what is, I call the Dr. Payne house, but it's still standing. So the house with the little brick building, that was structurally there at that time. Then was the town pound, past it. And then on the left side was the first tavern. And you can see the horse sheds and you can see the barns. And the only reason we know what that church looks like and we know what the original tavern on the left-hand side looks like is because Reverend Dow's daughter wrote a book. And in her book, it was called Bessie. If you want to read it, it was the life of a minister's daughter. It's a really cool little book because she's writing it like telling her granddaughter what it was like to grow up. In one copy of it, her own copy, she drew pictures of the church and she drew pictures of the tavern. So it's the only way we know. This is based on her drawings, and she was an eyewitness to that. Okay. All right. Now we'll move on a little bit. This is now in 1836 period, and this is John Warner's print of Thompson Hill, where we have the second Congregational church. So you can see there's still the tavern on the right. You can still see Dr. Payne's on the right. Now we've got a little bank. We've got a house where this building would sit in the future. And then past it is the Vernon Styles has now been constructed. So a lot of things happened in that 30 years, 35 years after that structure. So putting them side by side, you can see some of the changes in the town. So what happened to the first church? Well, a hurricane came in 1850 and damaged it so badly that it was beyond practical repair. So that's what happened to that first church. It was taken down, reconstructed into the building next to the Vernon Styles. So if you go to the right of the Vernon Styles, that's what happened to that first church. And you can go into the building and see it, see the beams and structure in there today. Now, what makes that second church really impressive, let me just jump back to it. That is an Ithiel Town church. Ithiel Town was on the left-hand side of the right image. That's an Ithiel Town. Now, Ithiel Town, he built state houses, he built state capitals, many major buildings. He was one of the original Academy founders for artists in the country. Noted as one of the first architects in the entire country. So he's pretty famous, and he was born in Thompson. Now at this time at the bottom, I know it's cut off a little bit, but it says the second print from John Warner Barber shows a Baptist church way in the distance over here. First Baptist Church is just being finished at this time, 1836. So we had one Congregationalist, one Methodist, and two Baptist churches. So this is the earliest image of the 1856, which is the one we're in right now. Why was this one built? So one theory, it was too small, and then number two, the smell was too much. So there is a story that William Mason, who was building his house right across from that second church, he said after Sundays it smelled pretty bad, and he would really prefer we have a bigger church over there, right? He wanted that storage, so he wanted that church moved, and he paid a very large amount of money to have it moved.
What was the smell about?
The horses on a hot summer day would be pretty strong there in front of the new house.
Moved or reconstructed?
Actually, it was taken down, pieces reused around the neighborhood, and the new one was completely built with fabulous materials, by the way. This was built with incredible materials. So things had changed. 1798, the public schools were taken away from the Congregational church. And by the way, this was across the state. It wasn't just ours pinpointed. Everybody no longer under church control. We have to be church and state starting to separate now. Yale and Harvard and Yale were divinity schools, and the Congregationalists really liked their ministers to come from these divinity schools. And that was an important element too. There was a major reconstruction in between 1904 and 1910, so you can see what that looked like in this building. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about the Great Awakening in a minute, but I want to get through the building part of the story first, because it does play a big piece to it. This church has been hit by we already knew about the 1815 Great Hurricane, which caused such damage to cause a second church to be built. And this is another one, in 1938, this hurricane did major damage. And you can see the old Thompson Bank next to it. It's hard to see, but at the top of the image, workmen are working to seal up the building to secure it. And after it was done, this is what it looked like from the late part of 1938 until the early 60s. It was steepleless. A group banded together, found the means, found a way, and reconstructed it in the 61 period. Been some argument about this image, whether this was a reconstruction around that time. And you can see down at the right-hand side that the little bank was still here before it moved to Old Sturbridge Village. So it says Boy Scouts on it. And that's how we know that this was before the Boy Scout gave up the building and it moved to Old Sturbridge Village where it is today. So the little Thompson Bank is there for those who don't know that. After that reconstruction, this is what you see. Beautiful interior. Now let's jump back in time and let's look at what it looked like in 1904 for a wedding. This is the Johnson Tracker. It's a gorgeous appearance. Turn around and let's look the other direction. This is quite a fancy wedding. It's September 7th, 1904. And then sanctuary was spiffed up again. That's what we have there. One of the reasons I did this is I wanted to have record of how much information do we have, what it looked like inside, for obvious reasons. If we get as lucky as we can to get full reconstruction done, what will it look like versus what did it look like? That's, guess what? Right, we get the steeple on there, and way to look at it is it's unlucky, or another way to look at it is when you've been around a long time, all these scars on my face are just built up of all the things I've been through, right? So when you've been around a long time, these things happen, and you just get through them, pat yourself up, heal, and move on. So once again, we're in the reconstruction business, putting on another steeple. And to get it all dropped back in place into, it was steepleless again since for 1987, and the 1990s, then it went back on with Peter Burchelli doing quite a bit of work there. And this is what it looked like over the common. All right, now, enough of that part. Connecticut was one of the last American states to separate church and state. Okay. Until that time, there was no religious toleration. That's the way they called it. But the reality was very different. So just because the state law said we have one church for the state, just because it said that, doesn't mean that the ministers actually practiced it. So what happened is in Thompson had lenient ministers. They knew that the Methodists were here. They knew the Baptists were here, meeting in houses. They knew it, but they felt that it was probably best to tolerate it, be accepted, as long as they paid their fees so they could do all the things they needed to do. But in 1818, a religiously tolerant Connecticut Constitution was finally passed. So it did happen. And there was 3 reasons. Number one, the Federalist Party had lost public support. So that's when Jefferson was coming in, and that was Republicans. Difference is Federalists wanted big, powerful central government, and Jefferson wanted more states to do their own thing. So that's the difference really between that. As I said, the non-Congregationalists unofficially in Connecticut supported the religious parties. So what does that mean? That means the Methodists who were at home being quiet would go to the state house and say, come on, other states are doing this. Let's open it up a little bit. Let's consider others. And they finally did push through the laws to grant independent churches. And these sects said, hey, I don't want to pay twice. If I'm going to be a Baptist, I'm going to pay the Baptist. I'm not going to pay the Congregational. The Congregational doesn't have to keep the people in charitable homes anymore. They don't have to worry about feeding them if they're hungry. The states were taking over those rights. So there's reasons why some of those laws changed. So many things changed for all Congregational churches in Connecticut. The schooling was stripped away. The policing, they were actually had policing responsibilities. The theft, Thompson Theft Detecting, right? How many people have heard of the Thompson Theft Detecting Association? Right? There was major Congregationalists were involved in that. And, morals and charity states tried to take over some of that. Then your church itself, the Congregational church itself, started to have conversations about what should we believe? And that was the difference between the Unitarians and Universalists versus the classic Calvin doctrine. And that I love these topics, by the way. I know I'm not going to give you 4 hours of this. I promise it's going to be over relatively quickly. But I did want you to know that I like the conversation. I like the discussion. 1818 Constitution did not allow all non-congregational religions to practice. So the Methodists were good, the Baptists, you're okay. Catholics, let's talk about that another day. You know, that's the thing. There were no Catholic churches here. There were other churches that were not welcome. So today we're a very tolerant, religiously tolerant state. That's been 2 centuries now since all this worked out. Took a while. Okay, now I'm going to switch over to once that 1818 opened up and we start to see the Great Awakening. Now the Methodists are coming. And Thompson has the beauty of having the old mother church. So West Thompson was the mother church of the Methodists. Now you see it says Methodist Episcopal Church. Whenever you see the word Episcopal, it means one thing, bishops. It means, so Congregationalists did not have bishops at this time, there were no bishops. But when Methodists say Episcopal, that means that Methodist church has bishops that are watching this. All of the churches that are listed below and more, so West Thompson was the mother church, Putnam, Danielson, Attawagan, North Rotary, East Thompson. There were 13 in all that all spawned from one West Thompson church. So why did the Methodists come in? Well, first of all, they didn't want to run into the powerful Congregational church. So when they came in, they said, you know what? The mills are starting to get going, but Congregationalists did not tend to settle down in the mill valleys. They weren't near the factories. They were on the top, right? They want to be in the top of the hill so the world could hear them. The bell would ring. The Methodists said, we're going to be quiet. We're going to go down into near the factory locations. And we're going to, those factory workers are going to be our congregation. That's what they were trying to do. Their churches also formed in very remote farming areas, as I'll show you some pictures. So these, even those, the little hamlets, they were difficult with poor roads. The bishops on the right-hand side, they used to ride around just to visit houses to drum up support. These were called circuit riders, and so you can see one. And Hezekiah Ramsdell, you know, Alice Ramsdell, that was a circuit rider. Hezekiah was a circuit rider. So this is just talking about the Methodists. This is the first one, the mother church, parsonage, right there. You can see what it looked like when it had a steeple. It also lost its steeple. So that occurred.
Where was that church?
It's
Where was that site?
Where was it? So if you are at West Thompson Dam,
Yep.
big dam, and you look out there, you can see the remnants of the old road. And
Okay,
if you keep going across the old road, it kind of rose up, and at the very end, there was the church. And then it used to come in, there's Church Street coming in from Putnam, right?
Yep.
Well, the reason is this was the mother church, so they would come up Church Street to go to church.
okay.
So you.
Past the ranger station, like in back of the ranger station?
Yeah, when you keep going on the main road there, West Thompson Road, you could take that left to Putnam.
Yeah,
That's called Church Street.
right,
And it brought you right to this church.
okay.
This church still stands. It was taken apart piece by piece. It was moved to the Belmont School for Boys, still there, and it's called the Hamilton. So it's nice that you can go see it if you wanted to go see it. I'm not expecting you to read this. All I want you to know is the Methodists were very proud of something that was very different than the Congregationalists. The Congregationalists had pastors that lasted a long time. They got to know the parishioners really well. The Methodists, you're only allowed to stay 1 year. That's the goal. So that's why you have all these pastors over there. People think, boy, nobody was happy. No, that's not the reason. They were told you're going to move on, and the only reason you didn't move on, occasionally you had one that stayed 2 years, is because it was a heavy snow and nobody could move. So that was the only, get out of jail free card that you had. I did want to tell you something. Even though the Congregationalists did a lot of this, it was not as formal. So I'm going to talk about the camping tradition. So the Methodists, in particular, again, Methodists, Baptists, and Congregationalists all had camping traditions. The Methodists really made a big deal about it. So if you go to Douglas, there is still a Douglas campground that you can go today. So what I'm showing you are old pictures of the Douglas campground. Now, we used to have a Methodist campground in Thompson, and it was a very sad story, but it was like the O.J. Simpson trial going back. There was a mill girl who went to the West Thompson campground, and she was raped by a minister. The minister hung her because found out she was pregnant. Now, I know I'm at a church function here and I'm doing this, but I want you to know, I could never explain why did West Thompson campground cease to exist When Willimantic kept theirs and Douglas kept theirs, why didn't we keep ours? We were the mothership of the Methodists. Wouldn't it make sense we kept one? Probably the reason was that trial of the century, they called it. And they didn't convict him, but they chased him out of every town he ever lived in. They chased him. He was not convicted. They chased him out. So there's a book called what I call it? The Minister of the Mill Girl is a book. And if you wanted to read it, it was heavily researched. And a woman from Britain just came over a couple months ago, wanting to do a bigger story and maybe even a movie on it because it was so big.
What year was that?
This is, I'm gonna say it's in the 1840s, something like that. All right, so continuing the story, just to get the idea of what these outside camps were. This is up here in Douglas as well. Just think how long it took to set up the benches. Look at that. But this was big. They would get outside in the pine grove and really they were really enjoying themselves here. Singing, there's a lot of singing. So this site still exists. They would go and eat, campground. They built a huge tabernacle. Look at the size of this tabernacle. We had a tabernacle in Thompson. Still looking for a picture for it, but we had a tabernacle.
Where was it?
The belief is if you're down, you know where the bank is in town right now?
Mhm.
Right near there, to the left of where the Lutherans ended up. Go to the left of the Lutherans. Supposedly we had a tabernacle, and I have no picture of it. That's that. Just continuing on, the churches that were built for the Methodists tend to be very plain inside, very simple. So you see the horse sheds. Sally White sent me a beautiful picture of some horse sheds when I do another part of the story, but I include it. But this is the Methodist one. That building is still standing, and it is now a person's doing some art in that building. All these churches had a communal dining. This was a big feature of all the churches after the Great Awakening. Before things were so cold, there were 4 hours. There were 4 hours at church. You would leave in the middle, go to the tavern next door, try to warm yourself up, get back and hear some more stories for 2 hours. You had a lot of communal because you built things together, but they started to build a lot more of these halls in all the facilities.
Is that the basement of the Methodist church in the?
That's
Yeah.
that, yes.
Why is
St. Joe's basement.
It does a little bit.
Yeah, I think similar times maybe reconstructed, but that's that one. Okay, I'm sorry for a little bit of history lesson here, but you gotta get this part out. So there was Reverend Wesley on the right-hand side, he was in Britain, and he was preaching, but he didn't really feel it. This is what he was doing, didn't feel it. And then in 1738, after he came back from a trip through the Americas, all of a sudden he started to think differently. Salvation was available to everyone. You say, oh, that seems kind of simple, right? Everybody can be saved. But believe it or not, the Congregationalists were they followed Calvin initially. And Calvin said, not so easy. You don't get in that easy to the kingdom. Calvin said, God has a choice in this, that you can be the blessed ones, but you have to do your job too. So Calvin was God was more stern. And I know I'm here with a religious organization, but I studied quite a bit of this, and I'm not claiming to be an expert, but I truly see the difference here. That he started to say, wait a minute, I don't think it was God's that stern that he's going to let anybody who's doing the right thing not in. So Wesley changed things. He really started to change it. Changed in Britain, changed in America. Just this idea, salvation is available to anyone. That's kind of an important thing. Now, Methodism movement, it was Wesley. It was coming from Germany. It was coming from the Netherlands. It was more of it was more of a fundamentalist type of thinking that we were just enthusiastic about it. We're gonna be out there preaching and singing and talking about that. Some of the Methodists decided that they felt we are going to switch sides. So there was a huge split. The Arminians didn't believe that God was as big a decider. It's up to you to decide that you want to be saved. So there was a split. And in America, Wesley allowed the American Methodists to go Arminianism. So just a little bit of a difference, and I hope that matches what your studies have told you here. Part of that is simplicity. So here is one of the most simple buildings that we have, the Methodist Episcopal. We knew they had the money to build the bigger churches, but they didn't. They built smaller ones. Again, I love horse sheds. So I just
That's still standing, right? That's on
Yeah.
East Thompson Road.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a plan.
Look how simple it is, right? Now, all of the Congregational, the Methodist, and the Baptist, they all believed in having lending libraries. Remember, the schools were under the Congregational for a long time. And all three of the first ministers were the ones going around making sure the schools were doing the right thing. And there would be Sunday schools, music, Reverend Dow, for everybody. There's lots of readings where you can hear Reverend Dow's marching up the street with all kinds of people singing, coming from his home, coming into the church. He taught singing in the church, not only in the church basement, but also there was a schoolhouse at the gate where Marianapolis is on the Route 193. When that was a little schoolhouse, he turned it into a house when they weren't in session. So just try to imagine him being really rah-rah about singing too. Sunday schools, there's lots of Sunday schools. Didn't see a lot of men in the Sunday schools. I don't know why. I'm just telling you what it was. This is one example. And here's another one. The only time in the photos is usually you see the men are there as some teachers. So I'd love to get more photos showing these Sunday school classes. There's dozens and dozens of letters that we've gotten. Norma, you've given us some of these letters where they're telling us about the excitement. It was more exciting for the Sunday school, not only for the kids, but also for the adults to really talk about things. It was a good cultural period of exchange. Now moving over to the Central Baptist. This was across the street from the Bernenstein House. This building was 1836. It burned in 1917. And the wells, it gives you a good idea of the placement. That's the Central Baptist.
That's right, in front of Vercelli's house.
Right next to Vercelli's
Next to it,
house.
okay.
Yeah. The Baptists now have been around for a long time. Remember, Roger Williams was in Rhode Island, and Roger Williams was not welcome. He was not what they'll call a great Puritan, right? He caused a lot of dissension because of his beliefs. People could dictate their own lives. And so he essentially, believe it or not, whether he moved in his own accord or at the end of a pitchfork, he left Boston and ended up in Rhode Island. And he was really the first one who talked about the need for the separation between church and state. This is in after the Revolutionary War, freedom of religion, freedom of those types of things. I don't know. I find it interesting how they wrote these great words, but sometimes it didn't come into practice, right? All men are created equal, and no woman could vote until 1920, right? Things took a while to get changed, but I think we have to be really proud of the ministers in Thompson because they let the Baptists and Methodists establish themselves around here and did not stop them. Even though the books, they say, gone to the Baptist. They put it in the congregational ministers would say, gone to the Baptist. But many stories talk about them going to parties together. It was a community, they knew everybody. They had some of the ministers, the Baptist ministers would come over here, the Methodists would go over there. It was nice, they shared things. Maybe a little tension, but it wasn't horrible.
Could you just say something about morals and dropped? What does that mean?
After the Revolutionary War, things had started to change. I'll give you a couple of examples. There were many births outside of marriage. The wartime, there was things that were done during wartime, like you might never see me again, so we're just going to enjoy ourselves, type of thing. So there was a lot of literally at that time they called it fornication. You would be convicted on fornication rules, and there was also a lot of swearing. The soldiers would come back and they would just be ripping it up in terms of language. And this was written, Ellen Larned writes about this quite a bit, and I'll be mentioning it. So morals had been problematic right after the Revolutionary War. And the Baptists, when they came in, they also were autonomous, but they did have bishops too. You say, how can you be autonomous and have bishops? The bishops were more consultative. That's what they were. Each church ran its own itself. And up here in Thompson Hill, the Baptists would walk down the hill, and they'd walk down to Baptism Pond, which is right at the bottom of the hill. Before you go up to the dump road, on the right, there's a pond there. And that water is called Baptism Pond Brook. And the pond itself was the baptism. They would march down, and they would go down there in the white dresses, and it would be adult immersion. And you'd be singing and all kinds of stuff going on. So lots of newspaper articles talking about that. The immersion is coming this week. So that was kind of cool. What happened also is this is where you had some of the leaders in the community break away now. So this is the Baptists when they were getting ready to build their big church. Now you have William Mason, Olney's, the Talcott's, the Joseph Gay, Stephen Crosby. These folks all formed together to have the Thompson Baptist Meeting House Company. And you actually sold a deed, right? This is a good example of a deed to your own little pew. So you bought your pews, and this is what it looked like when you got your deed. So the amount of money at this time, thinking about it, $75.50 for the pew. That's a huge amount of money. And for this time, we're talking about, oh my Lord, that's very expensive. This is just another view of the Central Baptist. The Baptists also had another church. So I just want to show you, this is the fencing that was around the heater piece. So where the well is and where the Baptists were in Jane Vercelli's house across from the Burns house, you have two fenced areas. And this is the one where about 1867, Ellen Larned said, you went to bed, it looked like that, with the broken fences laying down on the ground. And then the next morning, all the fences had been ripped up secretly by someone. And she said that's when Thompson became defenseless. So she had a great sense of humor. So we were defenseless, and it cleaned up the whole community. You can see, look at the background. You see that fence laying all over the ground and all that. So anyway, that's that. Left of the Baptist, between that house and to the left of it was basically a store. That was the Walmart of the entire town. And then it turned into a private home later. And that's the carriage shop where they made harnesses and all kinds of little pieces for your horses and buggies. That's what between Jane's house and the Baptist house. All right. We had another Baptist church. This is the 1803 one. And they were the same ministers in both churches, and they got along. They did get along according to the stories, but finally they had grown to a size where they said, this is getting too big, we're gonna need to have two. And because of the rules, everyone had to run themselves. They finally decided to have two ministers. One took the name of the Central Baptist Church and the other one was the East Thompson. And they're only 3 miles apart. But two different, Brandy Hill is where this one was. Look at the simplicity of that. All right, we're literally 2 slides from ending now. So what is this Great Awakening? And the Great Awakening was, we're talking about this morality problem. Between 1812 and 1815, there was a huge event that came out where thousands started to go to the churches. Before, remember, the morals had slid, they weren't going to churches as they were before. And this is coming right out of the text of the area. In the mills in Thompson in 1813, there had been swearing and drinking and some type of demonic curses. I'm not reading it word for word here. Satan had reigned most sovereign and despotic sway. That's a direct quote. Vice and morality had sway. The violins were out, the rum and the dancing every night, and the cursing, even by the women. It was terrible. And then in 1814, in less than a week, no violins were playing, no swearing, and only religious songs of Zion could be heard. And young people in particular listened to the preaching and the spiritual conferences every night. It all happened in a week. Something transformed it. After that, by the 1840s, the Baptists had been really, really big, pushing for temperance reform. And right here in Thompson Hill, the old town hall had just been reconstructed. And a guy by the name of John Go, who's a recovered alcoholic, came and spoke for days on end, packed it. People came from dozens and dozens of miles away to hear him speak. And he was, it's almost impossible to conceive of this. But this was a guy who wrote a book and said, I was the worst of the worst. I was the worst drunk, the worst I could be. And temperance reform began here. The Vernon Styles, after these people started to speak, temperance came in. They didn't sell any more beer or alcohol. So Congregationalists, the Baptists, and the Methodists all got behind the temperance movement to start banning alcohol. And that caused some problems. As you can sense, there was barn burnings. I don't know if you've ever heard of the barn burnings in Thompson, but it was some secret groups were going around and burning those who were against alcohol. If you're against it, you might lose your barn. And so there's a book on our website. Go look up the barn burnings in Thompson. It talks about that period. We're trying to regain control of things. And finally, as we all know, alcohol was banned for a while. That experiment failed, and alcohol came back in. It's much later. Now, why was there the surge in the church activity? And we think obviously freedom of religion was at hand. Connecticut government had listened. So that was one reason for the surge. But there was also something else that happened. And that was, they were talking about that moral behavior just prior to the war of 1812. It continued to slide. And then all of a sudden the British burned down the Capitol in the United States. Sorry, Judy.
Yeah. You kicked us out, but we came back.
It's, British were not tolerating the foolishness. We went up and did some damage in Canada during the War of 1812. And all of a sudden the British says, oh yeah, all right, we got command of the seas. We're gonna come in and we're gonna take you out. So they took out the Capitol, they took out the president's house, they took out other government buildings. And all of a sudden, there was a huge transformation all throughout the States. People, how could we possibly think that we could stand up to the power of the British Empire. What are we doing? Well, we can do it. And the ministers were involved. The ministers said, we have to hold together. We gotta buckle down and do the right things. And it's almost like the only thing I could compare in our lifetime was what happened during 9/11. We were living away, and then all of a sudden after 9/11, guess what? We all felt a lot differently about things. Things got a lot more serious. And that's pretty much it. I say, my theory is that's part of the Great Awakening. Last slide. So what happened next? After that, we got a little more serious. We decided we're gonna build some mills, we're gonna bring some mill workers in, because all the other people had decided to move west. There's no stones out there in Ohio, the land is ready. So many people moved out, we needed workers, they're coming in from Italy and Poland. My grandparents were immigrants, I'm sure all of us have immigrant. The O'Learys for sure, all coming in from somewhere. When you bring in the Catholics, they weren't welcome at all. But look at the churches they built. Then the Lutherans came, the transformation. So by the 1870s, we started to have another 7 denominations coming in. Seventh-day Adventists, we had the Catholics, we had Emmanuel Lutherans. So just a lot of change in the religious. So the big 3 had to make room for all these others coming in. So it was quite a transformation. Anyway, that's my story. The time I said I would. And I hope